And then the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld says that we have, what was it, like $4 trillion that were just unaccounted for?
They were missing, DOD was missing $4 trillion, but he said 2.3.
He said it was 2.3.
But it was 4. And I was working with a reporter, and we had a huge story coming out that Friday about the whole missing money and what it meant per person. So we had calculated for each taxpayer in each state how much you were missing. So, yeah. So that was the financial coup, which had started in 1998.
And where did all that money go?
Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out. And without the bank statements, I can't, so I've tried to map out, because money, remember, you're too young to remember, did you ever see the old Pillsbury Doughboy commercials where they squeeze down on one and it pops out someplace else?
Oh, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, so you're probably too young. So when the money started to going missing from the Treasury and the federal government, the offshore havens started to just balloon, So this is going down and this is going up. And anyway, but I have tried to unpack where the money's gone and what they've been spending it on. And I have a lot of guesses. But
what's your best guess?
I think it's many different things. The first thing, I think you've been financing a new system. So I call it the breakaway civilization. But I think you've literally been financing a new system. And it's like when you're running a company and you keep the old systems going and you get the new systems up and you bring the resources over steadily. And then at some point you're ready to bring this down. And I used to say the pandemic was the breakaways breaking back in and taking over. But I think they've moved a lot of money out. And in theory, if you look at how much has been stolen, it's enough to run a global government on an endowment basis. It is.
How much roughly total has been stolen?
So as of 2015, there was 21 trillion in undocumentable adjustments, but that's not cash. And it could reflect money coming in. So you could be bringing money in from the war zone. So how much is net missing? It's impossible to tell. But given everything, I would be amazed if it wasn't at least that much missing. So now, what I think you've been doing is you've been making enormous investments in black budget technology and infrastructure. So, so I think you've got a huge physical infrastructure. Some of it, when you did 9/11, you were able to move a lot more black budget on budget. And so that sort of eased the pain, because the problem with the black budget as of 9/11 was to get that money, you had to tell, the fraud had gotten so dysfunctional and wasteful. So you wanted to do more on budget. But, whether it's building a new governance system and a new endowment to run it, or invisible weaponry, secret space program, the infrastructure underground to platform that, I think it's all those things.
One of the theories that has been bouncing around in my head from recent guests that I've had on is that military contractors have been taking money from the U.S. government and from the Pentagon to develop futuristic weaponry, develop new physics, alternative propulsion, crafts that have some sort of alternative propulsion systems since the 70s, or even actually probably since the 50s, I think.
Here's how it works. Okay. 47. Do you understand the legal structure of how they did it?
No.
Okay. 47, you passed the National Security Act. Okay. And that gives you the ability to set up the secret infrastructure. 49, you passed the CIA Act. They literally had to kill the Secretary of Defense to do that. They assassinated Forrestal to get that done. We have a lot of interesting material on the Forrestal assassination on the Solarian. You should go through. Yeah, you should learn about Forrestal and what caused that assassination and what it did to create. You literally took several sections. He was the president of Dillon Reed. He was a partner of Dillon Reed.
Okay.
So
don't worry about it, Steve.
Well, even if he was, that's not what got him killed. What got him killed was standing in the way of creating Israel and giving them the nuclear bomb.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he wanted disclosure on the black budget. He was for disclosure on the black budget, and he didn't want Israel. He didn't want that part of the organized crime syndicate to get sovereign powers. So. Anyway, what happened was they made a deal on the 49. They got rid of Forrestal. They made a deal on the 49 Act. That created the CIA.
Okay.
And that made the CIA the most powerful banker in the world. Eisenhower put him in charge of Area 51 security. And literally, once you look at how the Exchange Stabilization Fund and sort of the different money aspects of the 47 and 49 Act organized to work, you've now created this financial mechanism that combines covert violence and makes it the most powerful banker in the world. I should say, on the covert side, the most powerful bank in the world is BIS. Didn't
they use, I could be wrong about this, but didn't Dulles take a bunch of money from the budget to rebuild Europe after World War II to build Area 51?
I don't know if he used that to build Area 51. He ran a slush fund out of the Exchange Stabilization Fund from Sullivan Cromwell and before they got the 49 Act created. And part of that was to create this infrastructure, because part of it said you can appropriate to all the different agencies and then claw it out secretly to give it to the intelligence agencies. Right. So they created, after World War II and all the slush fund money they got from World War II, they created a mechanism to constantly replenish the covert money. But here's the big thing. When Bush came in during the Reagan years as vice president, his deal with the intelligence agencies was he gets to run, or with Reagan, was he gets to run the National Security Council and the intelligence agencies. He creates an executive order signed by the president, by Reagan, that corporations can do highly classified work. Now, let me tell you what that means. What that means is the Treasury can issue an infinite number of bonds and use that money to pay corporations to do highly secret things, including just gifting them all of the black technology funded by the taxpayers and moving it onto their balance sheet, and do it in a secret way that generates enormous profits in the stock market.
Wow.
Okay. So now you've got a way. Now, what's the number one source of campaign contributions?
Companies like this.
Capital gains.
Capital gains. Okay.
Capital gains. I have a stock. It's trading at a multiple of 20. I give you $1 million a year contract. That goes up by $20 million. Your stock goes up. That creates capital gains for the investors and the executives, who then turn around and they or their law firms make political contributions. It's a kickback system.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
So if you read my book, I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, and it was designed to explain to you how that kickback system works.
Right.
Because, and the quote we have at the beginning is an old New Jersey street saying, make a law, make a business. So every time the government does something that makes stocks go up, they get a kickback of campaign contributions from that.
Right.
And of course, the taxpayers funding the whole thing. Now, let's go back to corporations. Now I can transfer trillions of dollars of invaluable black technology into the corporations and fund them with taxpayers' money to own and develop it secretly and keep it away from FOIA. So you and I can put in a FOIA and we can't find out because it's behind the corporate veil.
Right. Now, one of the fears about this is that allegedly since the 50s when they started working on some of this stuff, is that it's gotten so advanced in these black corporate or these black military industrial complex, aerospace corporations, whatever you want to call them, that they've become essentially more powerful than the U.S. military.
Correct.
Because of the technology that they have power up, they own.
Now, I can't say that it's more powerful than the U.S. military because they need the U.S. military to do a lot of what they're doing.
Well, essentially the way it was described to me is that these corporations or these organizations basically are so powerful and have such advanced technology that they have their own Air Force, their own their own Navy, everything.
Right. And we've had senators stand up and say this, but what I call them is a breakaway civilization.
Right.
They have broken away and they are so much more advanced Now, if you look at their assets, what I would say, if I could assert jurisdiction, those are our assets. Those were either gifted or stolen. They belong to us.
Right.
But it's not corporations who have a lot of technology. It is a breakaway civilization, and they literally think of themselves as a separate civilization and not subject to our laws.
Separate from not only the United States, but separate from the world, from all nations.
Separate from the human race.
Separate from the human race.
Understand how all the money worked in a neighborhood. And what I didn't understand till I went to Wall Street is you literally have to know how all the money on the planet works to understand how the money in a U.S. neighborhood works. Because it's organized, it's very centralized, and it's organized so that, so if you and I go to the White House, it'll say, here's how all the money works in housing, here's how all the money works in military. But it doesn't say, here's how the money works, in West Philadelphia. So you can't, now with relational databases, you could, and I've worked on that. But anyway, so I went to Wall Street because I wanted to learn how all the money, the planet works. And I went from sort of department to department to department, learning all the different markets. And then I figured out, it's all being rigged from Washington. It's the Treasury and the Fed. So I got to go to Washington. So I went to Washington. I was a partner at a firm called Dillon Read. And in fact, I have an online book called Dillon Read and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits about it's a case study in the intersection between organized crime and Wall Street and Washington. Anyway, so I went to Washington in the first Bush administration to be Assistant Secretary of Housing. And it's the Federal Housing Commissioner. And that's the person who oversees all the mortgage markets, both the credit, most of the credit, and then the rules and regulation. So, and I ran smack into all the mortgage corruption because a lot of the black budget is financed with mortgage fraud. And anyway, so I left, but I discovered the internet when I was in the administration. And so I created an investment bank that could use software tools basically to get all the information about how the money works and make it accessible to neighborhoods. So anyway, but my company, I started a company called Hamilton Securities Group. It was very successful. And we got hired on competitive bid by the Clinton administration. So I worked in the Bush administration, but we got hired by the Clinton administration to be financial advisor for the FHA. And we led $10 billion of mortgage auctions trying to stop the mortgage fraud. Which was, they had other ideas. They wanted to take the mortgage fraud the other way so we could have the financial crisis. Anyway, so I ended up in 11 years of litigation with the federal government, with the Department of Justice. Have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State?
With Will Smith? It's been a long time, yeah.
I played Will Smith in real life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I played Will Smith in real life. So we had 18 audits and investigations, 12 tracks of litigation, physical harassment, a smear campaign. It was right out of the movies. And of course, so Will Smith is a successful attorney. And in fact, his office in the movie is right next to where my office was, our company office was in Washington. And, everything's crazy and the world makes sense until he finds Gene Hackman, who's a former NSA employee, who explains how covert operations work. And in fact, now if you come to the Solari Report, we have a whole 12-part series called Deep State Tactics. So if you can't find Gene, you can listen to Deep State Tactics and understand how it all works. Anyway, but I got a real crash course. I'll never forget. First time I saw Enemy of the State, I'm like up in the front row. And I'm like, oh, it's my training movie.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing. So when you talk about the mortgage fraud, what specifically do you mean, and how does that work?
So financial fraud and mortgage fraud is like the joy of cooking. There are thousands of recipes, right? But if you want to know the most prominent, likely famous recipe for mortgage fraud and HUD housing, all you have to do is look up the Tony Soprano TV show did a series of 4 parts on HUD fraud by Tony Soprano.
Really?
Yes. And the basic, and it's interesting because one of the things that got me interested in money is it was this fraud that destroyed the value of homes in my neighborhood when I was a little girl. We had 4 boarded up, foreclosed properties catty corner to our block in West Philadelphia, and it had a huge sign, and it said, by order of the Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. And I used to think, who is that asshole? And so when I was sworn in, they said, by order of the president, you are now the Assistant Secretary of Housing. I thought, I'm the, and I went downstairs and I said, how many boarded up homes? How many foreclosed properties do we have in the foreclosed industry? My deputy said 50,000. I said, well, that's going to change. And that was part of the problem. But okay, so let's look at the basic fraud.
Okay.
So there's a home in the foreclosed property inventory of the Federal Housing Administration. They had financed a mortgage. They put an insurance policy on the mortgage, so they take the credit risk. It defaults. They pay off the mortgage holder, and then take back the property. So the property's sitting there in inventory. Okay. So let's say the property's worth $100,000.
So like when you find a house for sale on HUD auction, that's the situation.
Yes, probably.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Probably. Okay. So let's say the house is worth $100,000. Okay. You sell the house to someone, or you who's going to do sort of a quickie fix up. Okay. And you let them turn around and sell it at you put a mortgage. Let's say it's worth $150 now. They've fixed it up. Mm-hmm. You put a mortgage on it for $250, a lot more than it's worth.
Right.
Okay. They sell it to a not-for-profit who immediately defaults. Right. You pay off the $250 mortgage and take the property back, and you keep doing it again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And generating lots of money out the back door. So when I became FHA commissioner, we would find one property in Chicago which had financed and defaulted 5 times in 1 year.
Wow.
I know. You can imagine that. Anyway, but here's how I can make even more money.
I had a friend who did this. Not a friend. He was a guy who came in. He was one of my first guests on the podcast, and he was buying up houses in Tampa, and he was taking them and getting his friend to go do appraisals on them and like marking the appraisal up by like 5x, right, and then getting loans on it.
Right. That's sort of that's a variation. Now, here's how you really make a lot of money. When you issue the mortgage, you don't issue one mortgage, you issue 10 mortgages on that house, and you put them in a mortgage pool that's wrapped by Ginnie Mae so you can sell them in Dubai and nobody knows the difference, right? Oh. Right. And as long as there's money, you can skim out the back door of the FHA fund, no problem.
Wow.
Right. And it's really funny. So I had warned people about this kind of fraud, both when I was assistant secretary and then when I was the lead financial advisor. But you know what it's like when you fight these winds, and so I'm driving down the highway in Georgia, and my old roommate from college calls me and she says, "Fitz, have you seen the Soprano TV shows? They have the HUD frauds on the Soprano TV shows." And she said, "I guess you're telling the truth." And I said, wait a minute. So I was the former Assistant Secretary of Housing, and then I was the lead financial advisor for HUD. And I've told you about this for years. You don't believe me until it's on the Soprano TV show. And she said, that's right. So I said, that's why I say in America, fact is fiction and fiction is fact. If it's on the news, it's likely fiction. You know, if it's on the Soprano TV show, there's a...
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're getting your training film.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, remember, during the financial crisis, within a very short period of time, there was more money shoveling out the door. I mean, the TARP IG said total money the taxpayers financed is $27 trillion. $8 trillion would have paid off all the single-family mortgages in the country, right? So the total bailout of the mortgage fraud was 3 times all existing mortgages in the country.
That's bananas.
So one of my favorite quotes, I was told by a former intelligence officer who was involved in the financial fraud that Oliver North had said that HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. And based on what I cleaned up and what I dealt with, I'm absolutely convinced
HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. That is...
Well,
that's got a nice ring to it.
HUD's missing just from its financial statements $1 trillion from 1998 to 2015. So that's my whole thing about the missing money, which Catherine is that's one of those issues Catherine won't let go of. It keeps.